There was a name that even the gods spoke with caution, as if the very sound could open a chasm beneath their feet. It wasn't Zeus with his thunderbolt splitting mountains. It wasn't Poseidon who crushed cities with the violent force of the waves. It was Hades, the sovereign who demanded no applause, who did not parade his glory across the marble of Olympus, but who ruled over the final fate of all that breathed. While the gods feasted among nectar and gold, there was a throne buried beneath the root of the world, surrounded by silence, stone, and eternal sentences. And on that throne sat the one who never needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. Hades was not feared for his uncontrollable rage. That would be far too simple. The real horror lay in his calm, in his unhurried gaze, in his certainty that kings, monsters, heroes, and even the children of the sky would sooner or later cross into his domain. He did not pursue, did not beg for reverence, did not plead for power. He waited. And waiting, when it belongs to a god who never loses, is more terrifying than any war. The other gods fought over territories, passions, and revenge. Hades already possessed the only boundary that no one could ever cross forever, death. There were rivers in his realm that carried not just water, but forgetfulness, sorrow, and broken oaths. There were judges who weighed souls as if measuring the weight of secret sins. There were shadows that had once been proud kings, passionate women, murderers, poets, mothers, traitors, children, warriors, all equal before him, all stripped of titles, crowns, and lies. In Hades' underworld, there was no trick that could buy absolution. Not even the gods ignored this, because deep down, behind all their divine splendor, each one knew the extent of their own mistakes. They said Hades was cruel, they said he was cold, they said he was dark, but those who repeated this rarely understood the root of their fear. Hades terrified because he was incorruptible, because he didn't bow to the whims of desire, nor to the seductions of vanity, nor to the weaknesses that so often dragged Olympus into chaos. Where Zeus wavered between forbidden passions, Hades maintained order. Where Ares spread carnage on impulse, Hades upheld laws that not even time dared to break. What people feared in him was not just the god of the depths, but the presence of a justice without a human face, without tears, without retreat. And maybe that's why this story still echoes through the ages, like a whisper from an open tomb. Because it doesn't just speak of a god buried in darkness, but of the power everyone pretends to forget while living under the sun. Today, you're going to descend through corridors where no light enters, hear the distant clatter of eternal chains, and understand why even the immortals avoided provoking the invisible Lord. Get ready to cross the gates of the underworld, because there are stories that entertain, and there are stories that leave a cold mark on your soul. When the ancient Greeks looked up to the sky, they saw in Zeus the majesty of lightning. When they gazed at the stormy sea, they recognized in Poseidon the devastating temperament of the depths. But when the silence and night covered the houses, when morning knocked at the door, when a body was laid out under flickering torches and farewell songs, it was another name that took hold in people's imagination: Hades. Not the god of spectacle, not the lord of sudden fury, but the one who ruled over inescapable fate, the guardian of the final crossing, the sovereign of that which no being, divine or mortal, could bargain with for long. On this journey, we will not see Hades as a caricature made of empty evil, nor as a will-less shadow hidden beneath the earth. Let's face him, as the Greeks conceived him, in his most unsettling essence: an absolute king, cloaked in severe authority, shrouded in a funerary dignity that made every gesture heavier than a sentence. The fear he inspired didn't come only from the darkness of his realm, but from the fact that his word was final. Everything on Olympus could change with intrigue, desires, and alliances. But in the underworld, Hades' order didn't dissolve at the whim of fancy. Before we dive even deeper into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and help strengthen this journey through myths, darkness, and fate. And I want to see your presence in the comments. Let me know which city and state you're watching from. I want to know where your voice is echoing from as we cross the cold halls of the underworld together. Every comment is like a torch lit in this dark corridor, showing that there's someone on the other side, listening to every word of this shadowy journey. What makes Hades so fascinating isn't just his power, but the contradiction that surrounds him. He's remembered as dark, even though he's rarely the most chaotic among the gods. He's called cruel, even when his role is to maintain an order that upholds the balance between the living and the dead. He's avoided not because he's impulsive, but because his domain touches the central wound of all existence, the end. While other gods rule over aspects of life, Hades presides over the certainty that awaits all beings. And no crown shines when reflected over a tomb. So take a deep breath, because from now on the paths narrow, the torches flicker, and the ground beneath our feet no longer belongs to the world of the living. Let's explore the origins of his reign, the nature of his power, the reasons for his fear, and the stories that made even the immortals lower their eyes at the mention of his name. This isn't just the story of a god, it's the story of the authority before which pride loses its voice. And when that authority is called Hades, even Olympus learns what it means to feel a chill. Before Hades became the lord of the dead, there was the war that tore through divine blood itself. Cronus, the devouring titan, swallowed his children as soon as they were born, as if he could smother the future within his own belly. The sky was heavy, time seemed frozen, and Rhea's motherhood turned into a premature grave. But Zeus escaped. Raised far from his father's eyes, he returned like a postponed Selence, ready to free his swallowed siblings and set the cosmos ablaze in a war that would become known as the Titanomachemy. Among these siblings were Poseidon and Hades, torn from Cronus's organic prison as gods already marked by the trauma of confinement. Victory over the Titans didn't bring immediate peace, it brought the division of the universe. The three brothers drew lots to divide up the rule of creation. Zeus got the sky, Poseidon received the sea, Hades was left with the underworld. Many, upon hearing this, imagine it as a punishment, but the ancients understood something deeper. It wasn't considered a lesser prize, but rather absolute dominion over the most inevitable dimension of existence. While the sky and the sea were spaces of rivalry, the realm of the dead was a sovereignty without competition. No god, hero, or mortal king could permanently usurp this territory without throwing the very cosmos out of balance. Even so, there was a silent bitterness in this division. Zeus would rule in the light, surrounded by eagles, storms, and acclaim. Poseidon would stride over fierce waves and underwater palaces. Hades would descend. His throne would be raised where the sun would never set foot, among bronze gates, rivers without dawn, and plains inhabited by shadows. From the very beginning, his power carried a veil of isolation. He did not take part in festivals the same way his brothers did. His name was not invoked lightly. His image didn't inspire celebrations, but rather reverent fear. He became the necessary yet avoided sovereign. However, those who mistake distance for weakness are wrong. Hades turned darkness into structure. His realm was not a chaotic jumble of the dead wandering aimlessly. It was a sacred machine of passage, judgment, and permanence. There were the infernal rivers, Styx, Cocytus, Phlegethon, Acheron, and Leaf. There was Cerberus, the multi-headed beast, preventing death from being reversed on a whim. There were the judges of souls, Tartarus for the unforgivably guilty, the Elysian fields for the worthy, and the gray meadows for the vast masses who simply lived and passed on. Nothing in his domain was improvised. That's how fear was born, not of a hysterical god, but of a god who had accepted to rule over what everyone else refused to face. Hades didn't receive darkness as exile. He shaped it into order, made silence into law, depth into a throne, and death into a sacred boundary. The other gods could flaunt their brilliance. Hades possessed permanence. And it's precisely there that fear begins, when someone rules not over the moment, but over what comes after all moments have passed. Zeus ruled with flashes of lightning. His power tore through the sky, made mountains tremble, silenced armies, and set imaginations on fire. Hades, on the other hand, didn't need to shine. His power was underground, methodical, irrevocable. He didn't rely on public displays to command respect, because his rule revealed itself in the inevitable end of every story. The child being born, the hero brandishing his sword, the king raising his walls, the lover swearing eternity. All of them move forward without realizing it, heading straight into his domain. Hades ruled over what could not be avoided, and the inevitable always weighs heavier than the spectacular. Among his most unsettling symbols was the helmet of invisibility, forged by the Cyclopes. With it, Hades could move unseen, like death itself arriving without announcing its step. This artifact was not just a weapon, it was an exact portrait of his nature. Invisible yet absolute, distant yet present in every living creature. There was no need for showiness when the essence of power lay in operating quietly beneath the surface of the world. Even other gods recognized the uniqueness of this force, for it did not depend on applause, constant worship, or seduction. Hades existed as an inescapable clause written into the fabric of the universe. Beyond the helmet, there was wealth. Few remember that Hades was also called Pluto, the wealthy one, because from the depths came metals, jewels, mineral fertility, and buried treasures. The same soil that received corpses also hid gold, silver, dormant seeds, and the promise of harvest. This made him a god of disturbing ambiguity, lord of death, but also guardian of the riches that emerged from the earth. Beneath the surface lay as many dead as resources that sustained empires. It was as if the world secretly confessed that all splendor is born from what was once buried. Hades also held legal authority. His realm was upheld by unbreakable rules. Souls were not just gathered, they were classified, guided, and judged. Not even the gods entered this territory without consequences. When a mortal tried to cheat death, disobey funeral rites, or disturb the order of the underworld, they tampered with a divine mechanism protected by the sovereign himself. Hades was not an executioner driven by pleasure. He was the guarantor of stability between worlds, and an authority that doesn't bend to fleeting compassion usually inspires more fear than one that erupts in anger. That's the reason for his dark prestige among the immortals. Hades wasn't just strong, he was necessary. His realm kept the cosmos from becoming a ruin, where the dead wandered among the living, oaths lost their value, and punishments dissolved into impunity. While Zeus could be challenged through conspiracies and Poseidon in disputes, Hades stood as the final wall of balance. He didn't flash lightning across the world, nor did he roar before the seas, but he silently upheld the invisible architecture that separates those who breathe from those who have become memory. The fear Hades inspired among the gods wasn't just because he ruled over the dead. There was something even deeper. He ruled over a territory where even divine will met its limits. Olympus was a stage for vanity, fragile alliances, domestic betrayals, and desires that constantly clashed. But the underworld didn't belong to that theater. It was a stern jurisdiction, sealed by ancient laws, where lament replaced music and eternity replaced improvisation. Entering there meant stepping into a realm where Hades' authority wasn't symbolic, it was absolute. Even Zeus, lord of the thunderbolt, knew he couldn't treat the underworld the way he treated the clouds or the celestial palaces. There was a division of power among the brothers that upheld cosmic order. Crossing that line meant flirting with collapse. The Greeks understood that each god had their own domain, but Hades was qualitatively different. He didn't just rule over an element of nature. He ruled over the afterlife fate of men and heroes. To meddle in that domain wasn't just to offend a god, it was to threaten the very structure of final justice. That's why Hades' name carried a weight that needed no displays of ferocity. There was also a moral fear. Many Olympian gods had a history of selfishness, destructive passion, revenge, or manipulation. Hades, although associated with the abduction of Persephone, didn't have the same string of erratic excesses that marked several Olympian deities. His reputation was anchored less in constant scandal and more in the permanence of the position he held. That made him unsettling. A flawed, impulsive god can be predicted in his lack of control. A reserved god, capable of upholding cold laws and lasting sentences, becomes much harder to face. The unpredictable is frightening, but the inflexible is terrifying. Oaths sworn by the river Styx reveal a lot about this. Not even the gods dared to swear falsely by its waters because the punishment was severe, even for immortals. And the Styx belonged to the infernal circuit, to the sacred machinery of the underworld. This means that the fear of Hades also stemmed from the recognition that his realm held mechanisms tied to truth, punishment, and irreversibility. The underworld was not just a divine cemetery, it was a metaphysical institution where lies and transgressions came at a price. So the gods avoided provoking him, not out of simple cowardice, but out of clear-headedness. They knew that Hades didn't react like just any jealous rival. He represented a region of reality that couldn't be destroyed without dragging the entire world down with it. To challenge him was to toy with the very stitching that holds together life, death, and consequence. And even the most arrogant beings on Olympus knew to back down when they realized that before the Lord of the Underworld, their immortality didn't make them absolute, just temporarily removed from judgment. If there's one story that crystallized the fear surrounding Hades, it was the abduction of Persephone. Daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, she was picking flowers when the earth opened up like an ancient mouth. From the depths, Hades emerged in his black chariot, drawn by shadowy horses, and took the young woman to the underworld. The episode was etched into mythic memory as an act of violence, rupture, and transition. Not just because a daughter was torn from the world of light, but because the very soil revealed that beneath the spring lay an older, harsher, more irrevocable will. Demeter, consumed by loss, spread barrenness across the land. The fields dried up, fruit rotted in the womb of the trees, and humanity began to feel in their bones the cost of absence. It was then that something decisive was realized. Hades was not just a distant king among the dead. He could affect the world of the living in indirect ways, altering the balance of the seasons, the rhythm of fertility, and the survival of humankind. The fear of him grew because his power was no longer just about funerals and death. It also became a power over absence, over the emptiness left by what is taken without immediate return. When Zeus intervened to restore order, the agreement revealed the dark cunning of the underworld. Persephone had eaten pomegranate seeds, the food of the dead, and because of that, she could no longer fully return to the world above. Part of the year she would stay with her mother and part of the year with her husband in the infernal realm. In this gesture lies one of the most unsettling aspects of Hades. He didn't need to destroy in order to win. It was enough to seal a bond. All it took was to touch someone with the laws of his world for them to never fully belong to the surface again. This is a kind of power that corrodes even hope. At the same time, tradition also shaped Persephone, not as an eternal victim, but as the queen of the underworld. At Hades' side, she becomes a figure of authority, receiving the dead, sharing in judgments, and consolidating the funerary majesty of the realm. This makes the myth more complex and darker. The abduction remains a wound, but the transformation that follows shows that the underworld doesn't just imprison, it converts. Whoever descends does not return unchanged. Whoever touches its laws forever carries the mark of the depths. It was this process that terrified both mortals and gods. In the myth of Persephone, Hades stopped being just the distant guardian of the dead and became the god capable of taking from the world what is most precious to it. This story taught the Greeks that death does not come only as the end of the body. It also manifests as absence, rupture, winter, longing, and irreversible change. That's why Hades' name began to send chills through stories, because he wasn't just the lord of the final breath. He was also the one who could make life itself taste grief before its time. Many heroes descended into the underworld in search of glory, redemption, or an impossible challenge, but none of them crossed those gates as if visiting an ordinary kingdom. Orpheus went down to rescue Eurydice, carrying on his lyre the pain of someone trying to persuade death with music. Hercules entered to capture Cerberus as part of his labors, knowing he was stepping into a realm where brute strength alone wouldn't be enough. Odysseus sought out shades to gain knowledge. Each of these descents reinforced the same lesson. The underworld was not a stage for adventure, but a place to confront the limits that the world of the living tries so hard to deny. Orpheus perhaps most cruelly represents the nature of Hades' power. Moved by the music, the lord of the underworld allowed Eurydice to return under one condition. Orpheus could not look back before reaching the surface. The rule seemed simple, but it was a moral trap made from the very stuff of despair. And he failed. At the very last moment he turned around. Eurydice was swallowed by the darkness once again. In this story, Hades appears not as a monstrous brute, but as the ruler of an exact law, where a single gesture is enough to doom human longing. And nothing is more terrifying than losing what you love when salvation seemed just within reach. Hercules, the strongest of all mortals, also had to bow to the rules of the underworld. To take Cerberus, in some versions, he had to get Hades' permission. Just think about how serious that is. Even the hero who strangled monsters and diverted rivers had to acknowledge the sovereignty of that buried throne. You can't plunder the realm of the dead with impunity. You can't take its guardian beast without permission or conditions. This shows that the fear of Hades was ingrained not only in the gods, but in the very structure of Greek heroism. The highest virtue of mortals found its limits there. Even Theseus and Pirithous, when they tried to kidnap Persephone, learned the way to that mistake. They were punished in the underworld, bound to seats of forgetfulness and powerlessness. The message was crystal clear. Those who treated Hades as just another rival or his realm as a place for bravado would be stripped of their very dignity. On Olympus, affronts sometimes ended in reconciliation. In the underworld, they could turn into eternal stagnation. Hades' punishment didn't need spectacle. It was enough to immobilize, silence, erase. That's why even gods and heroes feared Hades. Not because he was the loudest, the most explosive, or the bloodiest, but because he represented the boundary that no strength, beauty, cunning, or lineage could cross without paying a price. In his realm, masks fell, muscles lost their arrogance, and crowns couldn't buy a way out. And when human or divine greatness descends to that point of truth, all that's left is a trembling reverence before the Lord who waits in silence.